All right, buckle up, because today's deep dive is a doozy. We're digging into this document on encounter types, and let me tell you, this thing's like the secret playbook for making stories grab you and not let go.
Yeah, it's a fascinating approach. I mean, breaking down stories into these different types of encounters, it's such a useful way to think about narrative structure, you know?
Absolutely. It jumps right into categorizing them, but before we get lost in the weeds, I gotta ask, what makes an encounter different from just a regular old scene in a book or a movie?
Well, I guess you could say it's a subtle distinction, but it's important. Think of encounters like those self-contained moments in a story. Yeah, like they add flavor, variety, they can be exciting, intriguing, memorable even, but you could almost pluck them out and the core story, the main plot, it wouldn't necessarily fall apart.
Okay, so like that bit in, say, The Lord of the Rings, where the hobbits, they run into Farmer Maggot's mushroom patch. It's fun, kind of tense, but does it change their quest? Not really.
Exactly. Now, compare that with, oh, I don't know, Frodo getting jumped by those ring wraiths on Weathertop spooky stuff. That's what this document would call a scene, right? Big implications for the plot, characters are messed up by it. It sticks with you.
Gotcha. So a scene is like a turning point, hinges on the story, whereas an encounter is more like a spice, adds flavor but isn't the whole dish.
You got it. Though here's where it gets kind of neat within both encounters and scenes. You can have these smaller beats happening, a chase scene, a tense back and forth. The document calls these sequences.
So it's like zooming in on the structure, right? Like those Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah.
You've got the big story arc. Then within that, you've got scenes driving the plot forward. And all throughout, sprinkled in, you've got those individual encounters adding depth and color. Man, this framework is pretty cool.
And what I really dig is how this document doesn't just leave it at these high-level concepts. It dives right into applying this framework to something as, well, seemingly straightforward as combat.
Which, let's be real, fight scenes are kind of like the bread and butter of a lot of stories,
Mm.
right? But when I saw this whole section on combat encounters, I got the feeling we weren't just talking about your average brawl here.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It goes way deeper than that. The document really dissects the purpose behind the punch, so to speak. Like, what is this fight actually doing for the story, for the characters? It's not just about who wins or loses, it's about the impact those clashes have.
Right. Like, I'm looking at some of these terms, and they're not messing around. Slaughter encounters versus growth encounters. Those sound like two completely different beasts.
And that's the cool part. This approach makes you think about fight scenes beyond just the spectacle. Yeah.
Hmm.
A growth encounter, for instance. It's not about just beating the bad guy. It's using that conflict as like a crucible for character development.
You know, it's funny you should say that. I was just thinking about that scene in Moana where she first goes up against Te Kā, that lava monster. Talk about intense. But she doesn't come out of that fight a master wayfinder, right? Yet it changes her. It's a turning point. She faces her fear. She gets a new understanding of what she's meant to do. That fight wasn't about brute force. It was about something deeper.
100%. And that's what makes those growth encounters so compelling. They're about those internal shifts, the lessons learned, right? The emotional fallout. The fight, it's like a tool to reveal character, not just a flashy action sequence.
Yeah, it's like that saying, what doesn't kill you? But, you know, speaking of intense encounters, we got to talk about these slaughter encounters. This document isn't advocating for, like, a bloodbath every time our heroes draw their swords, is it?
No, no, it's not that literal. It recognizes that sometimes, yeah, you need to give the audience a good old-fashioned action sequence, right? Like a release valve. Those slaughter encounters, they're about letting the heroes cut loose, show off their skills,
Yeah.
maybe even indulge in a little catharsis, you know? Think of those epic battle scenes. Stakes are high, energy's off the charts, the audience is on the edge of their seats.
So it's about giving the audience that visceral thrill, that sense of, hell yeah, good triumphs over evil, even if it's a little messy.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. The document hints at exploring other kinds of challenges that could provide a similar feeling, that sense of release, of mastery, but not necessarily through literal combat, like moments where characters get to push their limits and emerge victorious, but it's not about fighting.
Okay, now you've got me curious. What other kinds of slaughter could there be outside of a battlefield? I'm already imagining some really interesting possibilities here. But I do kind of want to shift gears for a second because this next section on social encounters really caught my eye. It's surprisingly extensive. Why so much emphasis on talking?
Right. Well, it's easy to assume that social encounters are inherently less structured, right? Like
Hmm.
more about improvisation, witty banter, that sort of thing. But in reality, those dialogue-heavy moments, those exchanges of ideas and emotions, they're often the heart of what makes a story truly captivating, you know?
Yeah, totally. It's like that killer closing argument in a courtroom drama
Yeah.
or that hostage negotiation where every word is like ratcheting up the tension. Those moments can be just as gripping as any car chase.
Absolutely. And this document, it gives you a framework for crafting those gripping social encounters. It's not just about letting characters chat, it's about structuring those interactions to have maximum impact.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the secret sauce here? How do you write dialogue that just crackles?
Well, one key thing the document harps on is this idea of an agenda. Sounds simple, right? But it's surprising how often conversations in stories aimed at real life go off the rails because people aren't clear on the purpose, the goal of the interaction.
So it's like setting the ground rules before a debate. All right, folks, this is what we're discussing. No tangents allowed.
Exactly. When everyone's on the same page about the goal, it focuses the conversation, you know? It prevents those moments where you're like 10 minutes in and you're like, wait, what are we even talking about?
You tell me about it. It's like in those romantic comedies where it's just constant miscommunication, misconnections because nobody's being direct about their feelings.
Hmm.
Just set an agenda, people, and get to the happily ever after.
Right. Okay, so you've got your agenda set. Now the document introduces this really cool system to make sure everyone involved gets their moment right. Turn, rebuttal, spotlight. It's like a formula.
Turn, rebuttal, spotlight.
I like the sound of this. It's like a dance, you know. Tell me more. And it's super straightforward. Turn just means each participant gets their say uninterrupted. Lay out your case, your perspective, no one jumps in. Then you've got rebuttal. That's where others can offer counterpoints, challenges, support, what have you.
So no one person dominates the conversation. Everyone gets heard, that natural back and forth.
Exactly. But then here's the fun part. Spotlight. This is where you allow for those really memorable character moments. You know, someone goes on a rant, a heartfelt confession, something that shifts the whole dynamic.
It's like literally shining the spotlight,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
The
yeah.
big speech, the tearful admission, the declaration of war, whatever,
Yeah.
packs the punch. This turn, rebuttal, spotlight thing is brilliant. And you know what's even more brilliant? This isn't just for fictional conversations.
Right. Think about how much more productive meetings would be if everyone followed this framework. Clear agenda, everyone gets a turn, thoughtful rebuttals, and bam, space for those aha moments.
I'm already picturing myself trying to implement this in my next team meeting. My colleagues are going to think I've gone full storytelling guru. But, you know, speaking of aha moments, this next section on intrigue encounters is really calling to me. Time to get cerebral.
Get ready, because this is where the document really digs into those delicious moments when the audience leans in, you know, puzzles, mysteries, those things that just tickle your brain.
Okay, so we're talking riddles, hidden clues, maybe some good old-fashioned detective work. I am so here for it.
You got it. And the document breaks down all these different flavors of intrigue. Like, you've got your classic mystery encounters, right? Unraveling a secret, solving a crime, putting those puzzle pieces together.
Oh, like a classic whodunit. Love those. It's all about those aha moments when you finally crack the case.
Exactly. But it also delves into this other intriguing type of mystery encounter called the explore encounter. And this one's less about solving a specific problem and more about, like, encouraging a sense of wonder and discovery.
So less Sherlock Holmes, more Indiana Jones, like those parts in a video game where you stumble across a hidden area and you're like, whoa, what's this? And you just have to explore it.
Exactly. It's about rewarding curiosity, letting the characters and the audience, by extension, uncover secrets, find hidden pathways, piece together the history of the world.
And maybe find some cool loot along the way. Speaking of which, the document also mentions loot encounters. Are those exactly what they sound like? A chance for the characters to strike it rich?
They can be, but it's not always about, like, golden jewels, right? Loot in this sense. It can be anything that's a tangible reward for the character's efforts. A powerful weapon, a rare artifact, heck, even a vital piece of information.
So it's those moments where their hard work pays off. They've got something to show for it, even if it's just a clue that deepens the mystery.
Precisely. And sometimes that loot, it becomes this catalyst for even more intrigue. It leads them down a new path, opens up new possibilities. It's like opening a treasure chest and finding a cryptic message. And you're like, ooh, conspiracy.
Ooh, I love that. It's like those classic adventure stories where the hero finds a mysterious map or a coded message, and suddenly they're off on a whole new quest.
You got it. And speaking of classic adventure stories, the document even has a category specifically called Indiana Jones Encounters.
Okay, you had me at Indiana Jones. What makes an encounter worthy of that title?
Think about those classic indie moments, right? Thrilling action, but also puzzles, traps, a good dose of wit and humor, booby-trapped temples, ancient riddles, daring escapes.
Those scenes where your heart is racing, but you can't help but grin at the same time because it's just so much fun.
Exactly. And the document points out that those thrilling moments, they're often heightened by this sense of urgency, you know? It's not just about solving the puzzle or escaping the trap. It's about doing it against the clock.
Ooh, yeah, that ticking clock. Suddenly the stakes are higher. Every decision feels more important. It's like that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, with the giant boulder. You're like, go, Indy, go.
Precisely. But even with all the chases and escapes, sometimes the most compelling encounters are those that force the characters inward.
You're talking about those moral dilemmas,
Right.
right, where there's no easy answer. The document calls them dilemma encounters, if I'm remembering right.
You got it. Dilemma encounters those pressure cooker moments where characters have to make a tough choice and there's no clear right or wrong.
Okay, so hit me with a real nail-biter. What kind of scenario would really put those characters in the audience through the ringer?
Okay, imagine this. A character discovers that their best friend, someone they love and trust, has committed a terrible crime. Let's say they stole something vital, like something that could save lives if it's returned, but would be disastrous in the wrong hands.
Ooh, that's rough. Loyalty versus justice, right? Do you turn in your friend, potentially save lives, knowing it'll destroy your friendship? Or do you try to cover it up, hope for the best, knowing that might have even worse consequences down the line?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's the power of a good dilemma. It forces everyone, characters and audience alike, to confront these messy truths. What do we value? What are we willing to do to uphold those values?
It's like holding up a mirror to your own moral compass, right? And the thing is, these dilemmas, they're not just limited to fiction. We face them all the time, maybe not on such a grand scale. But those choices, those internal struggles, they're part of what makes us human.
100%. Think about everyday dilemmas. Do you tell your friend you hate their new haircut? Do you call out a colleague who takes credit for your idea? Do you stand up to a bully, even if it means putting yourself at risk? Not life or death, maybe, but still require navigating those gray areas, making choices that align with who we want to be.
And those little choices, they add up, right? They shape our relationships, who we become. It's wild how this whole conversation about storytelling keeps coming back to those core human truths.
It's kind of unavoidable when you think about it. Stories, they're reflections of us, right? Our hopes, our fears, our struggles. And this document, with this breakdown of encounter types, it's almost like a framework for not just how stories are structured, but how we as people move through the world.
It's blowing my mind over here. This whole conversation has been eye-opening. Before we get too philosophical, there's this other section in the document I want to unpack. Travel encounters. Always loved a good journey narrative.
Who doesn't, right? The journey is such a classic storytelling device for a reason. It just opens up so many possibilities, adventure, self-discovery, those chance encounters that change everything.
Exactly. And it's not about the destination. It's the stuff that happens along the way, the growth that occurs.
100%. And this document does a great job of reminding us that travel encounters, they're often overlooked or treated as just these transitions, but they're actually golden opportunities. They can add so much depth, create these memorable moments that linger.
I'm all ears. How do writers, storytellers, how do they make those travel encounters really sing?
Well, first off, the document breaks it down into two main types: road encounters and camp encounters. Road encounters, these are the unexpected events, right? The stuff that pops up while characters are literally in transit.
Oh, so like a sudden bandit ambush, or a chance meeting with a mysterious stranger, or maybe even just a natural disaster that throws their whole plan off course.
You got it. Keep these characters on their toes and, by extension, the audience. Then, on the flip side, you've got camp encounters. Those moments of respite, reflection that happen when everyone stops for the night, a chance to catch your breath, and for those quieter, more character-driven moments to come out.
Ah, yes, the classic campfire scenes, right? Sharing stories, forging bonds, or maybe plotting against each other.
Exactly. These quieter moments, they're crucial for character development. They often reveal more about who these people really are than any big action sequence ever could.
I love that the document emphasizes that these encounters, even if they feel like detours from the main plot, they're opportunities to flesh out the story world, make it feel real and lived in.
Absolutely. And it's not just about adding flavor or padding the story out. The document argues that travel encounters, they can introduce new plot threads, foreshadow future events, even subtly test the character's resolve.
It's like those moments that seem insignificant at the time, but then they end up having these huge ripple effects later on.
Exactly. And one of the most intriguing types of travel encounters the document talks about is the campfire scene.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Campfire scene sounds cozy. Tell me more.
They can be, but they can also be incredibly powerful storytelling tools. The document describes them as moments of really intense character interaction and role playing, often driven by the players themselves.
So it's about giving the players or the characters in a book or movie the space to just breathe, just be themselves. No big external threats, just those natural interactions.
Exactly. It's those organic moments of connection, revelation that happen when people let their guard down. Think of all those classic scenes, people gathered around a campfire, sharing stories, fears, hopes, dreams, maybe even confessing their darkest secrets.
It's like the masks come off.
Yeah.
You see the real heart of who these characters are.
Right. And the document makes this interesting point. It doesn't even have to be a literal campfire. It's more about creating that atmosphere, intimacy, vulnerability, that sense of shared experience where people feel comfortable opening up.
Those late night conversations with close friends where you lose track of time and just talk about everything and nothing.
Yes. And these campfire scenes, they can happen anywhere, and they're great for developing relationships, revealing backstory, even moving the plot forward in subtle ways, a shared anxiety, a whispered rumor.
It's like they say, the real story happens around the campfire. This whole deep dive into travel encounters has been amazing. I'm seeing them in a whole new light. But I think it's time we shift gears again and talk about this next category, R&D encounters. Is this where things get technical?
In a way, yeah. R&D, that's research and development. These encounters, they're all about the process of discovery, invention, innovation, whether it's a new technology, a magical artifact, or even just a deeper understanding of the world itself.
So like those montages you see in movies, the scientist working tirelessly in the lab, the inventor tinkering away in their workshop. It's not just about the what, it's about the how they got there.
Exactly. And here's an interesting distinction the document makes. It talks about downtime R&D scenes, those more leisurely periods of exploration and experimentation, and then urgent R&D encounters. When the pressure's on, they need a solution now.
So like a relaxed brainstorming session versus a desperate race against the clock.
Precisely. And the type of encounter, it obviously affects the tone and pacing of the scene.
Yeah, I can see how downtime R&D could be a really cool way to introduce new concepts, new technologies to the audience organically. You get to tag along with the characters as they make these discoveries.
It lets the audience experience that aha moment right alongside the characters. And then those urgent R&D encounters, those can be super tense, right? You're racing against time, the stakes are high.
Like in those heist movies where they're trying to crack the code, disable the security system before the vault closes. Man, this breakdown of R&D encounters is fascinating. I'm realizing how much storytelling potential there is in those moments of creation, those eureka moments.
Totally. And the document even suggests that these R&D encounters can be used to introduce ethical dilemmas, moral quandaries, especially when you're dealing with potentially dangerous discoveries or new technologies.
So it's not just about the how, it's also about the why and the should we. I love how this document keeps pushing us to think beyond the surface. But speaking of pushing boundaries, I think it's time we tackle the final category. Spiritual encounters. Time to get deep, folks.
Buckle up, we're going inward. Spiritual encounters, they're all about exploring those big questions, the meaning of existence, introspection, revelation, connection to something bigger than ourselves.
I'm feeling more zen already.
Yeah.
But how does this translate into a story? What does a spiritual encounter actually look like?
It can take many forms, right? Sometimes it's a moment of profound self-discovery. A character has an epiphany that just changes their whole worldview. Other times, it's a more mystical experience, a vision quest, a communion with nature. Something that reveals hidden truths, or maybe grants them new powers. And sometimes it's as simple as a character wrestling with their faith or questioning their place in the universe.
So it's not always about organized religion or the supernatural. It can be much more personal, more nuanced than that.
Exactly. It's about those moments where characters are grappling with the big questions. Why are we here? What's our purpose? Is there something more to life than what we can see and touch?
Those are questions that have been around for centuries. Philosophers, poets, everyone's trying to figure those out.
And for good reason, right? These questions, they tap into something fundamental about the human experience. We all crave meaning, connection. And spiritual encounters, even in fiction, they let us explore those yearnings in a safe, imaginative space.
It's like those moments in a movie or a book that stay with you long after it's over, you know? They make you think, they make you question your own beliefs.
Absolutely. And the document, it stresses that these spiritual encounters, they shouldn't feel preachy, you know? They should feel organic to the story, true to the characters who are experiencing them.
So it's not about forcing a belief system on the audience. It's about creating a space for genuine exploration, for those moments of awe and wonder.
Exactly. And the beauty is, they can be incredibly powerful even when they're subtle, understated. Sometimes it's the quiet moments of reflection, those fleeting glimpses of something transcendent that resonate the most.
This whole conversation has been like one big spiritual encounter. My mind is blown. But speaking of perspective, this whole deep dive, it's got me thinking about all the different ways these encounters, no matter what type they are, can create those unforgettable moments that stick with the audience.
Right. It's using these encounters as building blocks to craft a narrative that's compelling, that resonates with people. Whether it's an action-packed fight scene, a heartfelt conversation, a mind-bending puzzle, or a soul-stirring spiritual moment, every encounter has the power to deepen our understanding of the characters, the world they live in.
This document has been a masterclass, I'm telling you. I feel like I need to go back and rewatch all my favorite movies, reread my favorite books with these fresh eyes, this new understanding.
I highly recommend it. You start to appreciate the craft of storytelling on a whole other level when you understand these mechanics at play.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this incredible deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Yeah.
We've been digging deep into all these different encounter types, right? But it all boils down to those pivotal moments in a story, those encounters that grab you, they get under your skin, they stay with you. So here's my challenge. Next time you're reading, watching something, heck, even just people watching in real life, pay attention.
Yeah. See if you can spot the encounter types. Is it a growth encounter, pushing someone to change? A dilemma encounter where they're wrestling with their values? Or maybe it's a spiritual encounter, hinting at something bigger.
And think about it. How do those moments, big or small, how do they build the story? How do they make you feel? What do they make you think about?
The more you pay attention to this stuff, those building blocks, the more you see the magic behind the curtain, the artistry of it all.
It's like we've unlocked a secret code or something. Suddenly you start seeing stories everywhere, not just in books and movies, but in our own lives, the world around us. It's all connected.
Because at its core, that's what storytelling is, right? Trying to understand this whole human experience thing. Love, loss, courage, fear, the search for meaning, it's all in there.
And by getting a handle on how stories work, how they're put together, I don't know, it makes you appreciate them even more, the power they have to move us, to inspire us, to help us make sense of it all.
So yeah, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and most importantly, keep those storytelling gears turning, because everyone's got a story in them.
This has been amazing. Truly a deep dive for the books. Can't wait to see what fascinating rabbit holes our listeners send us down next time. Until then, happy reading, happy watching, and as always, happy storytelling.